Okay, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Practicing step 3 is like the opening of a door, which to all appearances is still closed and locked. All we need is a key and a decision to swing the door open. There is only one key, and it is called willingness. Once unlocked by willingness, the door opens almost of itself, and looking through it, we shall see a pathway besides which is an inscription. It reads, "This is the way to a faith that works." Let me take care of the dryer and I'll be right back. life, okay, was to feel good and get along with other people. I didn't look at, I looked at God, following God as, well, there must be severe limitations that I'm up against when I'm following God. Like, He's invisible and you never actually hear what He has to say. You never actually hear what He has to say in words, So I thought to myself, well, maybe I'm not needing more faith. Maybe I'm just needing a different plan, you know what I mean, in life. If I can just figure out how to feel good and get along with people, you know what I mean? That's where I was at when I got to step 3, because things were falling apart everywhere, every direction, I couldn't seem to manage to not be lawless. You know what I mean? I just I couldn't seem to follow directions very well, and I couldn't seem to follow man's instructions, and I just wasn't getting it, That's what I was thinking was wrong with my life, And then the psychologist said that, well, sounds to me like you need to go to AA for a little while and see if that's your problem. And so I did. All right, my glasses. I had them. But I got to step 3, and they said, no. You need to find a faith in God that works. You've had faith in God, but you haven't had a faith in God that solves all of your problems. And I said, are you telling me that I can learn how to have a faith in God that'll solve all of my problems? And they said, yeah. And once, if you find that faith, then you won't need, you will find that you don't need anything else. And so I said, okay, I'll do step 3. Okay. Okay. Once unlocked by willingness, the door opens almost of itself, and looking through it, we shall see a pathway beside which is an inscription. It reads, "This is the way to a faith that works." In the first 2 steps, we were engaged in reflection. We saw that we were powerless over alcohol, but we also perceived that faith of some kind, if only in AA itself, is possible to anyone. These conclusions did not require action. They required only acceptance. So the first 2 steps you've done are only acceptance deals. Like all the remaining steps, step 3 calls for affirmative action, for it is only by action that we can cut away the self-will which has always blocked the entry of God, or if you like, higher power. in our lives. Faith, to be sure, is necessary, but faith alone can avail nothing. We can have faith, yet keep God out of our lives. Therefore, our problem now becomes just how and by what specific means shall we be able to let him in. Step 3 represents our first attempt to do this. In fact, the effectiveness of the whole AA program will rest upon how well and how earnestly we have tried to come to a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood it. To every worldly and practical-minded beginner, this step looks hard, even impossible. No matter how much one wishes to try, exactly how can he turn his own will and his own life over to the care of whatever God he thinks there is? Fortunately, we who have tried it, and with equal misgivings, can testify that anyone at all, can begin to do it. We can further add that a beginning, even the smallest, is all that is needed. Once we have placed the key of willingness in the lock and have the door ever so slightly open, we find that we can always open it some more, though self-will may slam it shut again, as it frequently does. It will always respond the moment we pick up the key of willingness. Maybe this all seems mysterious and remote, something like Einstein's theory of relativity or a proposition in nuclear physics. It isn't at all. Let's look at how practical it actually is. Every man and woman who has joined AA and intends to stick has, without realizing it, made a beginning on step 3. Isn't it true that in all matters touching upon alcohol, each of them has decided to turn his or her life over to the care, protection, and guidance of Alcoholics Anonymous? Already a willingness has been achieved to cast out one's own will and one's own ideas about the alcohol problem in favor of those suggested by AA. Any willing newcomer feels sure AA is the only safe harbor for the floundering vessel he has become. Now, if this is not turning one's life and will over to a newfound providence, then what is? But suppose that instinct still cries out, as it certainly will, yes, respecting alcohol, I guess I have to be dependent upon AA. But in all other matters, I must still maintain my independence. Nothing is going to turn me into a non-entity. If I keep on turning my life and my will over to the care of something or somebody else, what will become of me? I'll look like the hole in a donut. This, of course, is the process by which instinct and logic always seeks to bolster egotism and so frustrate spiritual development. The trouble is that this kind of thinking takes no real account of the facts, and the facts seem to be these. The more we become willing to depend upon God, the more independent we actually are. Therefore, dependence, as AA practices it, is really a means of gaining true independence of the spirit. Let's examine for a moment the idea of dependence at the level of everyday living. In this area, it is startling to discover how dependent we really are and how unconscious of that dependence. Every modern house has electrical wiring carrying power and light to its interior. We are delighted with this dependence. Our main hope is that nothing will ever cut off the supply of current. By so accepting our dependence upon this marvel of science, we find ourselves more independent personally. Not only are we more independent, we are even more comfortable and secure. Power flows just where it's needed. Silently and surely, electricity, that strange energy so few people understand, meets our simplest daily needs, and our most desperate ones, too. Ask the polio sufferer confined to an iron lung who depends with complete trust upon a motor to keep the breath of life in him. But the moment our mental and emotional independence is in question, how differently we become. How persistently we claim the right to decide all by ourselves just what we think and just how we shall act. Oh yes, we'll weigh the pros and cons of every problem. We'll listen politely to those who would advise us, but all the decisions are to be ours alone. Nobody is going to meddle with our personal independence in such matters. Besides, we think there is no one we can surely trust. We are certain that our intelligence, backed by our willpower, can rightly control our inner lives and guarantee us success in the world we live in. This brave philosophy, wherein each man plays God, sounds good in the speaking, but it still has to meet the acid test. How well does it actually work? One good look in the mirror ought to be the answer enough for any alcoholic. Should his own image in the mirror be too awful to contemplate, and it usually is, he might first take a look at the results normal people are getting from self-sufficiency. Everywhere he sees people filled with anger and fear, society breaking up into warring factions. Every fragment says to the other, we are right and you are wrong. Every such pressure group, if it is strong enough, self-righteously imposes its will upon the rest. And everywhere the same thing is being done on an individual basis. The sum of all this mighty effort is less peace and less brotherhood than before. The philosophy of self-sufficiency is not paying off. Plainly enough, it is a bone-crushing juggernaut whose final achievement is ruin. Therefore, we who are alcoholics can consider ourselves fortunate indeed. Each of us has had his own near-fatal encounter with the juggernaut of self-will, and has suffered enough under its weight to be willing to look for something better. So it is by circumstance, rather than by any virtue, that we have been driven to AA, have admitted defeat, have acquired the rudiments of faith, and now want to make a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God. We realize that the word dependence is as distasteful to many physicians and psychologists as it is to alcoholics. Like our professional friends, we too are aware that there are wrong forms of dependence. We have experienced many of them. No adult man or woman, for example, should be in too much emotional dependence upon a parent. They should have been weaned long before, and if they have not been, they should wake up to the fact. This very form of faulty dependence has caused many a rebellious alcoholic to conclude that dependence of any sort must be intolerably damaging. But dependence upon an AA group or upon God hasn't produced any baleful results. When World War II broke out, this spiritual principle had its first major test. AAs entered the services and were scattered all over the world. Would they be able to take discipline, stand up under fire, and endure the monotony and misery of war? Would this kind of dependence they had learned in AA carry them through? Well, it did. They had even fewer alcoholic lapses or emotional binges than AA's Safe at Home did. They were just as capable of endurance and valor as any other soldiers, whether in Alaska or on the war beachhead. Their dependence upon a higher power worked, and far from being a weakness, this dependence was their chief source of strength. So how exactly can the willing person continue to turn his will and his life over to the care of God? He made a beginning, we have seen, when he commenced to rely upon AA for the solution of his alcohol problem. But now, the chances are that he has become convinced that he has more problems than alcohol, and that some of these refuse to be solved by all the sheer personal determination and courage he can muster. They simply will not budge. They make him desperately unhappy and threaten his newfound sobriety. Our friend is still victimized by remorse and guilt when he thinks of yesterday. Bitterness still overpowers him when he broods upon those he still envies or hates. His financial insecurity worries him sick, and panic takes over when he thinks of all the bridges to safety that alcohol burned behind him. And how shall he ever straighten out that awful jam that cost him the affection of his family and separated him from them? His lone courage and unaided will cannot do it. Surely he must now depend upon somebody or something else. At first, that somebody is likely to be his closest AA friend. He relies upon the assurance that his many troubles, now made more acute because he cannot use alcohol to kill the pain, can be solved too. Of course, the sponsor points out that our friend's life is still unmanageable even though he is sober. And after all, only a bare start on the AA program has been made. More sobriety brought about by the admission of alcoholism and by the attendance at a few meetings is very good indeed, but it is bound to be a far cry from permanent sobriety and a contented, useful life. That is just where the remaining steps of AA program come in. Nothing short of continuous action upon these as a way of life can bring the much desired result. Then it is explained that other steps of the AA program can be practiced with success only when step 3 is given a determined and persistent trial. This statement may surprise newcomers who have experienced nothing but constant deflation and a growing conviction that human will is of no value whatsoever. They have become persuaded, and rightly so, that many problems besides alcohol will not yield to a headlong assault powered by the individual alone. But now it appears that there are certain things which only the individual can do. All by himself and in the light of his own circumstances, he needs to develop the quality of willingness. When he acquires willingness, he is the only one who can make the decision to exert himself. Trying to do this is an act of his own will. All the 12 steps require sustained and personal exertion to conform to their principles, and so we trust to God's will. It is when we try to make our will conform with God's will that we begin to use it rightly. To all of us, this was a most wonderful revelation. Our whole trouble had been the misuse of our willpower. We had tried to bombard our problems with it instead of attempting to bring it into agreement with God's intentions for us. To make this increasingly possible is the purpose of AA's 12 steps, and step 3 opens the door. Once we have come into agreement with these ideas, it is really easy to begin the practice of step 3. In all times of emotional disturbance or indecision, we can pause, ask for quiet, and in the stillness, simply say, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thy will, not mine, be done. Okay, now we go back to this. We were now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker, as we understood him, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. We thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to him. We found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person. But it is better to meet God alone than with one It is better to meet God alone than with one who might misunderstand. The wording was, of course, quite optional so long as we expressed the idea, voicing it without reservation. This was only a beginning, though if honestly and humbly made, an effect, sometimes a great one, was felt at once. So that's what you did when you got baptized, for sure. You said, I offer myself. That's what you were doing. Okay. All right. And you can go to that bookmark And you can reread that prayer or you can write that prayer out. Because that's called the third step prayer. There's a third step prayer and there's a seventh step prayer. And then there might be a ninth step prayer. I don't know. But I had to memorize. I memorized that prayer just so I could pull it up anytime I wanted to. It has the white bookmark. I think that's, you know, at that particular point, you're told, you know, that it's just been the misuse of your willpower. You know, that you haven't brought your willpower into agreement with God's will. You know what I mean? And that's what's causing all the problems, is that you have to find that dependency on God to know and to trust His will for your life, you know, and to seek it. You know what I mean? And we seek it through willingness. And then what else I got out of there was that step 3 begins all the rest of the steps that are action, you know. Does there seem like anything that you have questions on?
No. No, I think that seems pretty simplified and straightforward.